What does it really mean to be a Christian patriot? Is loving God and country compatible, or does it put us at odds with our faith? In this episode, Daniel Darling joins me to challenge the misconceptions, push back on the fears surrounding Christianity in public life, and remind us why religious freedom and pluralism matter now more than ever. Welcome back, my friends, to the Derate the Hate podcast. I'm your host, Wilk Wilkinson, your blue-collar sage, calming outrage and helping to navigate a world divided by fog and those who would spread that fear, outrage, and grievance. The Derate the Hate podcast is proudly produced in collaboration with Braver Angels, America's largest grassroots, cross-partisan organization working towards civic renewal. This podcast amplifies the mission that we share to foster a more respectful and united America where civic friendship thrives even when we disagree. Each week, through the power of story, conversation, and connection with incredible guests, we work to build bridges instead of barriers. Not to change minds on the issues, but to change how we see one another when we differ. Because, friends, it really is about bettering the world one attitude at a time. We did not create the hate, but together we can derate the hate. So be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, share it with a friend, and visit braverangels.org to learn how you can get involved in the movement to bridge the partisan divide. Friends, I am so incredibly grateful that you have joined me for another powerful Derate the Hate episode. So let's get to it. This week, I am joined once again by my friend Daniel Darling. Many of you may remember our earlier conversation about his book, Agents of Grace. This time, Dan returns to talk about his newest book, In Defense of Christian Patriotism. We dive deep into the difference between Christian patriotism and Christian nationalism. Two terms that often get conflated, but could not be more different. Dan reminds us that loving God first actually allows us to love our country rightly. We also explore the founder's vision of religious liberty, the dangers of forced religion, and the importance of protecting a pluralistic public square where people of all faiths can contribute. As America approaches its 250th anniversary, this conversation couldn't be more timely. Together, we unpack why Christians should engage in politics without fear, why pluralism strengthens democracy, and how true patriotism must always be rooted in love, not cynicism. It's another DTH episode you won't want to miss. Here we go. Daniel Darling, how are you, my friend? Welcome back to the Derate the Hate podcast.
I'm really good, man. It's so good to be back on the podcast talking to you, and I hope you're well. Thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I always enjoy our conversations. I think the last time we saw each other was Braver Angels National Convention last year in Kenosha.
We did have lunch together. I know that.
Yeah. So I know we had that conversation. Then I had you on the podcast back on episode 195 or 196, talking about your book, Agents of Grace, and how we can bridge divides, loving how Jesus loved. And I really enjoyed that conversation, Dan. And when I saw you have this new book coming out, In Defense of Christian Patriotism, I wanted to have you back on. So again, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So Dan, tell me what inspired this book. We've been hearing a lot lately, and I just want to ask you this, because Christian patriotism, Christian nationalism, those, I have to imagine that those are, to a certain extent, a different thing. But what does Christian patriotism mean to you?
Well, I appreciate that. This book came from, I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time. I've always felt like I've been fairly patriotic ever since when I was a kid. I think 11 or 12, my parents packed our station wagon if you remember those, in the Chicago area. And we drove to Washington, D.C., and we toured all the monuments. I just remember standing at the Lincoln Memorial just being filled with such awe and wonder and pride at our country. I think in recent years, particularly conservative Christians, of which I would consider myself, have been really fed, I think, a steady diet of sort of people shaming us for loving our country, for being involved in politics, as if you love your country, you're somehow not faithful to your calling as a Christian, right? And I think a lot of people act like if you can't love your country because you're supposed to love God first. And I want to kind of disabuse people of that and say, no, you can actually love these all if you have the ordering right. C.S. Lewis talked about this, Chesterton, going all the way back to Augustine, that if you love God first, you actually should and can love your country well. And I think a lot of commentators, particularly on the left, will kind of conflate the worst elements, the most extreme people, with all Christian conservatives, right? And under this banner of Christian nationalism, right? Everybody that loves their country, everybody that wants to vote a certain way or feels a swelling of pride at their country is a Christian nationalist. I do think there is a segment of Christians, it's a small group, who would call themselves nationalists, and they're rethinking the Constitution. Is it really adequate? Do we need more of a theocratic state? Do we need a Christian Caesar? All that kind of stuff. Should we require that everyone who serves in government be a Christian? And I oppose that. I'm a Baptist. I believe a free church and a free state is the right thing. I don't think it's the government's job to tell people what to believe. I think you should have the right to believe. The government should pave over the conscience. It's not the government's job to decide right and wrong belief. That's right. We believe God does that, right? Jesus said, render to Caesar what's Caesar's and to God what is God's. But that's a small group of people that actually believe that. And I think what happens is the media and the left at times conflate anybody like you and me who love our country, who love God, who bring our Christian principles to bear to the public square in our voting, as if we're somehow dangerous or we're Christian nationalists. And I just don't think that's right or fair. I think it's good and right for Christians to be patriotic. I don't know how you can see what the scripture says about seeking the welfare of your city if you hate your city, if you hate your country, right? So I think it fits within a Christian dynamic. And I do argue in the book that Christianity is not a threat to democracy. It actually helps nurture democracy. And our founders understood this. Most of our leaders throughout our history understood this. Even if you're not a Christian, you should step back and say, okay, a healthy dose of Christianity among Americans is generally good for our country.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, so there's a couple things I want to dive into a little bit deeper there, Dan, is the imposition of a particular faith. And I know this is something that you've written about, you talked about before, maybe in terms of whether it be putting the Ten Commandments in a classroom or an imposed religion that's imposed by a state or a theocracy, things like that. Talk to me a little bit, and then I want to get back over to the idea of it's a small portion of people, but those people that do try to say that everybody has to be Christian to be in our government and things like that. But dive in a little bit deeper about just the concept itself of an imposed religion and what that means and how off base that actually is.
Yeah, well, the founders, by the way, who are all, I don't think we would say they were all evangelical Christians as we would understand them. Some were more universalists, but all of them were steeped in Christianity. They were influenced by even Thomas Jefferson, who is probably the most secular of the founders. He did say that you need a healthy Christianity to make this experiment work. John Adams said this will only work for religious and moral people. Even Jefferson would say things like, we have to be careful that we don't incur the anger of God because of the things we're doing. So they all had a fear of God. In our founding documents, they talk about God, particularly the Declaration, says our rights come from God, which is to say that our rights don't come from the government. They actually come from God. The founders, though, they did not want a state church. They had looked through church history and through human history and saw really how a state church, where the state says you have to be a part of this particular denomination or this particular faith, they saw how poorly that went, both for the church and for the state, right? For the state, that too cozy alliance, you see religious wars, you see a lot of persecution, and they felt like religious freedom would be the best way of organizing the government. And I think personally that comports with Christian doctrine, that in the New Testament particularly, but even the Old Testament, you see with the Noahic covenant, but the New Testament, where Paul is telling Timothy to pray for all your leaders, those in authority, that we may live a quiet and peaceable life. And then he talks about the Christian gospel as if to say, we just want a government that allows us to worship freely. We don't need a government that's forcing people to believe certain things. I believe as a Christian, as a Baptist, that Christianity can flourish in the marketplace of ideas, that it doesn't need an assist from the government, because we believe that the Holy Spirit is the one that does this work, not the government. That being said, what the founders didn't intend, and I don't think is healthy, in the late 20th century into the 21st, there's this idea of that separation of church and state means we have to drive Christianity completely out of the government. And this idea that the government can't partner with Christian ministries, right? Or we have to push Christians out of the public square, or that Christians who serve in government, who happen to be Christians, think like Mike Johnson is a very devout Baptist, or Mike Pence was a longtime evangelical. George Bush talked about how Jesus was his favorite philosopher. A lot of folks looked at it and said, oh, that's dangerous. That's a state church. That's theocracy. No, that's not what the founders intended. They wanted people of faith to participate in their government. They just didn't want a state-mandated church. And as a Christian, I believe forced conversion is not genuine conversion, right?
No,
to make someone believe by the edge of the sword is not genuine conversion. However, we don't want to go the other way and push secularism, that we have to push this all out of the public square so that Christians are nowhere to be found, that Christians can't bring their values to the public square along with everybody else. And I think secularism has this fiction that there can be a neutral public square, that a naked public square. Well, as Richard John Newhouse said 40 years ago, that something will fill that, right? Something will fill that void. So we don't believe that, but we don't want a state church. We don't want the government saying you have to believe certain things. That never goes well. Goes well. At the same time, we don't want to push Christians out, right? I mean, a lot of Christians are engaged at all levels of government. They bring their values to the public square, as do other religions, Jewish people, Muslims. And you come together, you work together, and you bring it to the public square you as much as you can, and you live alongside other people who agree differently than you, and you work together for the common good.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think a lot of times people conflate the idea of freedom of religion with freedom from religion, and then a freedom from religion then gets translated into, well, now I can completely insulate myself from whatever your religious teachings are, and I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to see it. It's kind of like I want to cover my eyes, my ears, everything, which you and me both know, based on our work with Braver Angels and the other things that we've done, when we completely silo ourselves from different things, and I think this can be said about a lot of different religions, Dan, is when we completely silo ourselves from different things, like Monica Guzman says, right, those who are underrepresented in our lives will be overrepresented in our minds and our imaginations. We start to make up things about things of which we know nothing. So we turn it into something that it's not, and then it becomes this really ugly thing. Whereas I believe, and I know you believe, Christianity is this beautiful thing. Love as Jesus loved, kind of like we talked about back when we were talking about Agents of Grace, and the whole thing about Christianity that well, Christian faith or any faith for many faiths for that matter is when we don't know anything about them and we start to demonize them because of what we imagine that thing is. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for us. It's not good for them. So then as I take that into the next part of this, and to kind of build upon what you were saying, as in there is a certain portion of Christians and some of the louder mouthpieces. There's few of them, but there's some of the louder mouthpieces that say, "Oh, we have to have only Christians in our government because this is a Christian nation," or "Oh no, we can't have any Muslims within our government because they're going to bring this, that, or the other thing." I mean, talk about the dangers of that particular mindset, and I think, I mean, you definitely keyed on it a little bit when you said a forced religion, forced compliance with a particular religion is dangerous, but that whole Christian nationalism and those that are trying to force into what we're doing. Dive into that a little bit more.
And again, I think it's a small segment of the American people. We did some survey at the Land Center of Southern Baptists, for instance. And Southern Baptists believe in religious liberty for all. They want people to bring their values to the public square, but high percentage believe in religious liberty, not just for Christians, but for all faiths here in America. And Southern Baptists are very, very conservative politically, vote Republican, vote conservative. And then there's been a couple other surveys just of the general populace of Christians, and it's something like maybe 10% or 8% or something of people who genuinely believe that we should force Christians to we should have a state church or make people be Christian to be in the government. So it's a very small percentage. It's a conversation largely happening in academic circles, both among Protestants who might call themselves Christian nationalists or Catholics who call themselves Catholic integralists. And I think human history shows that arrangement doesn't work, that forced conversion is not genuine conversion. It generally, a state church idea generally is bad for the state and for the church, right? It creates a sense of nominalism where people are just doing it because they have to. And it also creates, it gives the state a power that God has not given the state to decide between wrong and right beliefs. I mean, Jesus said in Matthew that he's the one that separates the sheep and the goats. No, that's not the job of the government. And so I think it's a bad idea. I also don't think it's very possible. I mean, to get the American people to vote for a state church, not happening in our lifetimes. We can barely pass a pro-life referendum, I'm pro-life, in red states. We're not going to get people to vote for a state church. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think some of it stems from frustration people have with, I think, some of the media and the left pushing Christians out of the public square, making Christians who are patriotic feel as if they're doing something wrong, those kinds of things. I think some of it is frustration from that, but I don't think it's a good arrangement. And if you look at a state church idea today, contemporary versions of it, I mean, on the one hand, you have Vladimir Putin, who it's a state church, but he persecutes Baptists and evangelicals because they're not Russian Orthodox. Or you look at the Church of England, and I think conservative evangelicals would argue that's not really working that well in the UK. So there are obviously, our arrangement, the American system of government is not perfect, right? It's not the kingdom of God, but it's hard. You're hard pressed in human history to find a better arrangement, a better system. And I do think it's incumbent on Christians to, if you want if you want America to be more Christian in character, to work locally through our local churches, through our communities, sharing your faith with people around you. If you look at American history, we've seen those things like the Second Great Awakening or some of the revivals from the 1970s or things like that. That's the best way to do it, and work in our communities, work in our families, and also understand that as Christians, even though our neighbors may not agree with our faith, they may have a different faith, we disagree strongly with them, they are people made in the image of God. We should care about the flourishing of our neighbors, even if they don't agree with us. That is a distinctly Christian idea. And so I think that's where we should be focusing our time and energy. But again, I think most Christians don't feel that way. They're patriotic. They're many of them conservative. They want to live in freedom. They want to raise their families. They want to see the country flourish, really.
Yeah. I know I do as a Christian conservative and somebody, I mean, somebody who loves Jesus and loves the teachings of Jesus and loves what it's done, in my opinion, for all humankind. I think that it worries me that there is a segment of the population. I think it's a growing segment of the population that does have a fear, not a fear of the Lord like we're kind of called to do, but a fear of Christianity. And I don't know why you've mentioned the term public square a number of times so far in the conversation, Dan. Mm-hmm. And I too think that Christianity wins in the public square, in the marketplace of ideas. I believe that. I truly do. What I don't quite understand, and what I'd like to understand more about, is why there are so many out there, and it seems to be a growing number, that have a fear of Christianity, and why Christianity or Christian patriotism, mm-hmm. why it has to be defended, and why it can't, why it can't just be accepted. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a number of different levels. I think since really the middle of the 20th century, there has been a concerted effort among the far left. I don't want to impugn the entire left side of the spectrum, because even though I disagree, there's many good people that disagree with you and me politically on that. But I think there's been a move by the left to, really since the middle of the 20th century, to push Christianity out of the public square, to see it as dangerous, retrograde. I think it began in the academy a little bit with Marxism and that those kind of ideas that push from the academy into the culture. I think there's been, and this has been corrected in the last, I think, a couple of decades, thankfully, through some really good Supreme Court rulings. But prior to that, an idea of jurisprudence that said any contact that the government has with Christianity is illegitimate and violation separates church and state. And thankfully, the courts have corrected that overcorrection. But I also think there's a little bit of bias in media coverage. And look, I have a lot of friends who are journalists doing great work, so I don't want to impugn all journalists. I know journalists doing really good work. But I do think there's a concentration among the media in places where there's not a ton of Christian people or conservative folks. And so many of them see Christians, conservative Christians, as this kind of weird species that they have to investigate. Right? And they don't understand Christian witness. For instance, I think, however you feel about January 6th, I think post-January 6th, there was all these books and all this analysis done that basically conflates the worst actors on January 6th with every single evangelical Christian. And I'm sitting here saying, wait a minute. The ladies that go to the church ladies in my church who are doing VBS and raising money for missions and the families in our church trying to raise their families. Yes, they voted conservatively because they have certain values and beliefs, as is their right as citizens. They are not the same as some crazy extremist, right?
Right.
And as every movement has extremists, every movement has crazy uncles. We have some on the right. There's many on the left. To conflate those is unfair. And I also think that Christians getting involved in politics, voting certain ways, mobilizing, really offends a lot of folks on the left. They're fine with us being pious about our faith on Sundays, but God forbid we live that out in our voting patterns and the way we vote. Now, again, you may disagree with that, but I think it's our right as citizens to exercise these things. And what's interesting to me, there's religious activity on the left, and you see in more progressive churches a mixing of Christianity and politics, and that doesn't seem to offend people. So I think there's this big effort to push out of the public square. I think some of that's changing because of some of the dynamics vibe shift, whatever you want to call it. But I do think it has caused a lot of conservative Christians who are good people to say, what? Maybe they're right. Maybe I should be more conflicted about how much I love my country. Maybe I shouldn't be involved. And so they've kind of stayed out of the public fray.
Yeah. Well, and there's a couple things there that I think are hugely important to key on is number one, I mean, part of our thing as Christians is supposed to be to kind of profess our Christianity. I don't think we want to force it on anybody, but the free expression of our Christianity and being able to share that with other people is, I think, hugely important. One of the things that I've seen that is unfortunate when it comes to like Christian patriotism is people, and the same thing happened, whether it be just in politics in general or during like the COVID pandemic and things like that, is people, when they are castigated or thrown in a particular lot with some other people who may be considered a little crazy, right? They just start to self-censor themselves. They don't even talk about the things. Yeah. They quit. They quit feeling like they can freely express themselves with it, which I think is an important part of Christianity. I think it's also an important part of patriotism. I think, and then combining the two, I think is hugely important. Another same thing happens quite often when we talk about conflating the two kinds of people, or conflating the crazy with the non-crazy, is things that happen every time something happens that makes national news and it's related to gun violence or something. They try to conflate that particular person with every NRA member, and a big portion of that, I think, is hugely problematic, because we have to remember that while I'm a Christian, you're a Christian, I'm a conservative, you're a conservative, every time a so-called Christian conservative does something wrong, that does not mean automatically that it can be tied back to you or I and how we believe or whatever. There is a sense of individuality that has to be recognized in certain things. Far too often, if somebody claims to have done something in the name of, well, it happens to Muslims all the time, right? Somebody did something in the name of Allah, and now they are considered, they try to lump everybody in. It's the same thing is happening with Christianity, white males, conservatives. This happens quite often, and it doesn't matter what the group is, but it seems like society has tried to take the craziest out of any individual group. I'm glad you brought up the thing with the church ladies within your church and doing vacation Bible study and stuff like that. How do you conflate their actions or them as people with the same people that would do the kind of rioting that happened during January 6th? It's just, you can't do it, but it's a tie that people try to tie together to try and make the best of us out to look like the worst of us.
Yeah, there's a lot of animus, I think. I think there always has been, and I traced this in my book. Even Ronald Reagan was given a lot of grief for his strong evangelical faith. And then George Bush, for heaven's sakes, he says, when asked in the primary, I remember this, who's your favorite philosopher? And he says, Jesus Christ. And the media went insane. It's a theocracy. It's this. I mean, George Bush leading a theocracy. And then Mike Johnson, I talk about this in the book, his first speech as Speaker of the House, he says, I feel like Moses called by the Lord to do this. Well, this is something Christians have said forever, right? He feels like it's God's providence that I'm here. Mm-hmm. People said that he was a white nationalist with a smile. I mean, it's just crazy. And there's just an animus, I think, toward people of faith. You see some of the anger that people had about thoughts and prayers after the shooting, which, again, a shooting is awful. Nobody's saying that's all we should do is pray, but to disparage people who that's the best they can do after a tragedy, because it's hard to make sense of the evil of attacking a school, to say, well, we don't want your thoughts and prayers. Well, I mean, there's that kind of animus. But I do think the response for Christians is to not return animus, but to say, okay, we're going to live this way boldly. whether people like it or not. We're going to love our neighbors. And we love our country. And I'm trying to make the case that it's good for Christians to be patriotic. It's good for them to love their country. And the U.S., America, the American experiment really flourishes when Christians do that. Are there crazy Christians? Are there extremists? Are there Christians that are poor examples? Absolutely. But on the whole, I think Christians are good for the country. And I'm trying to say that. And I'm trying to tell Christians as we approach America 250, and people are going to be thinking about the 250 years of this country, what does it look like to be patriotic? What does it look like to love God first, but also love your country? What do we mean by that?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question and something that everybody needs to ask, not only Christians, but all Americans. As we approach that 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, what does it mean to love your country? And how we hear a lot about populism these days, Daniel, and we as a country do have to kind of think about where we are in history, and I recently hosted a conversation on the podcast where we were talking about religious pluralism and how that plays out in more of a populist country that we are seeing today. I mean, I think there's kind of a populist movement going on these days, and we hear talk about Christian nationalism, but then we also live in a time where religious pluralism, especially in the United States of America, is something that we definitely have to think about. It has to be part of the conversation. So as we get closer to the end of our time here today, Dan, and we'll have to pick this up another time, but talk to me real quick about that religious pluralism and how that ties into the American identity, and how we can both support religious pluralism, be good Christians, and also be patriots. So I guess that's 3, not 2, but
yeah, I love that question.
It's important. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to take the last one first, because when we talk about patriotism, sometimes people think, oh, that means blindly supporting the party in power or the people in power, or like North Korea, dear leader to your president or whatever. That's not what we're saying. Teddy Roosevelt has a great quote that patriotism sometimes means opposing policies or opposing the president, whatever. You're doing it out of love of country. What patriotism is, though, is a rejection of the cynicism about the country that I see mostly on the left, but I'm starting to see some of it creep on the right to say, we've lost the country, we're gone. Maybe this project of American exceptionalism, American experiment of ordered liberty isn't a good one. We should start over with something else, all that kind of stuff. Or just kind of a rooting against America. I don't think that's healthy or good for a Christian. I don't think you renew the country and help the country change or help America survive another 250 years with cynicism. I think you do it out of deep love for the country. Our best heroes and our best people that have built this country did it because they deeply loved it. So I think that's what patriotism is. When it comes to pluralism in America does not mean this idea that we think everybody, that we just paper over our differences and pretend that we agree on everything. Actually, pluralism in the country means we are willing to live side by side with people because that we know disagree with us, right? And actually, when I lean more into my Christianity and my beliefs that Christianity, I believe Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. I believe Christianity has the truth. I disagree with others who have other faiths, but my Christianity teaches me that I look at my neighbors as being made in the image of God, as neighbors that I'm supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that's what makes the American experiment work, that we're not saying everybody should just come together and pretend we agree. Actually, when we come together, even though we disagree, that's where it really works well. And that's one reason why I think the Braver Angels idea is a unique one and a good one. When you go to a Braver Angels event, this is one of the most unique things I've ever seen. Nobody's asking you to be less Christian, less Republican, less conservative. They're saying bring all that with you. And if you're on the left, bring all that with you and then figure out, where do we agree? Where we have to live side by side as neighbors. We both love our country. How do we make this thing work? And I think it's a great thing. I think that's the idea of the founders. And we want this country to flourish for not just our generation, but for future generations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So as we approach the 250th anniversary and we think about our identity, to step into your Christian faith and really lean into American patriotism and our religious pluralism and our Christian faith, and all of these things can coexist. And I think all of these things are hugely important. And then more than anything, kind of to your point, and many people have heard me make this point, you don't have to be something other than what you are to be part of Braver Angels. We're not expecting everybody to come away and in some squishy middle. I love the way you say it, Dan, is if you're a conservative, if you're a Christian, bring all that with you. It's important to have that all in the conversation. Daniel Darling, thank you so much for joining me on the Derate the Hate podcast again. The book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism. The book comes out September 30th of 2025 this year, right? So I think this will probably air shortly after that. So the book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism. Daniel Darling, it's been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much. I'm certainly looking forward to the next time.
Well, thank you, and I love the work you're doing. Just honored to be a guest today.
Friends, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. And if there's anything in this episode that provided exceptional value to you, please make sure to hit that share button. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to subscribe to get the Derate the Hate podcast sent to your email inbox every week. We really are better together, so please take a moment to visit braverangels.org and consider joining the movement towards civic renewal and bridging our political divides. This is Wilk wrapping up for the week saying get out there, be kind to one another, be grateful for everything you've got, and remember, it's up to you to make every day the day that you want it to be. With that, my friends, I'm going to back on out of here, and we will catch you next week. Take care.